Welcome back, yogis. Welcome to today's session where I'd like to do a much deeper dive into the first two of yoga's limbs, the yamas and the niyamas. So what these ethical or moral guidelines ask us to contemplate is how we can really practice the greater outline, the greater impact of yoga off of the confines from the yoga mat. So really almost anyone can get into a headstand or a heart opener if they practice long enough, if they dedicate enough time to the physical component of the practice. But not everyone is always going to feel really truly aligned and rooted in the lifestyle that is yoga. And so that is something that I strive for, that I seek for myself, and something that I want really deeply for each of you to experience because it's just so beautiful and life affirming. So if you want to really start living your yoga, I feel that this is the best place to start, working with the yamas and the niyamas. So we're going to take a look at how they apply both during the course of a yoga class, as in when you are in active asana, when you are on your mat, as well as how you can carry them off the mat with you. I'll give some examples, and certainly it's something to ponder and journal about. Use your packet, your booklet to journal about and explore how they're coming up for you in your life and in your yoga practice. So first, what I'd like to look at are the yamas. And the yamas are considered to be the restraints. These are more the principles of ethical behavior. They're character building, and this is more about the external experience. So the yamas are about how we relate with the rest of the world around us, as we are relational beings, not just with what's going on in our external world, but we also have a way of inner relating, which we'll get to in the niyamas. So these are the wise characteristics, the restraints. They quite literally mean to control or to contain, and we see this in the word pranayama. And 5 of them are listed in the Yoga Sutras, and as well there are 5 niyamas, so 10 in total. I will be putting up slides to show you the Sanskrit as well as the most brief translation in English, but I really recommend you take some notes for further study. We're going to be diving into a lot more detail than the most basic definitions. So let's begin. The first of the yamas, which most folks have heard of, we hear this a lot on the yoga mat, is ahimsa. So ahimsa, yes, does mean nonviolence and non-injury. However, most people kind of think of this as something that is much more obvious. Like, yes, of course, we're not going to walk into a yoga studio and punch the other students or be physically violent with the other students. This is not generally something that most folks on the yogic path struggle with or find challenging, hopefully, ideally. But forms of violence or himsa can creep in a lot of different ways. So I want to bring to awareness that this speaks of ahimsa, speaks of also non-violence, non-injury, or non-harming in speech, in thought, in deed, in action, and of course toward others, but also toward ourselves. So when we are in a place of violence toward others or toward ourselves, it really inhibits our ability to drop into the sacred flow of life. It doesn't feel congruent. So on the mat, this might look something like not forcing yourself into a posture, really taking that child's pose when you need to, taking the breather when you need to, using a prop like a blanket to cushion your joints when that's most appropriate, not causing injury to yourself unnecessarily. And off the mat, this might look like, as an example, your relationship to nature, of course, to one another and to yourself. But how do you interact with and treat nature? Of course, living here in Costa Rica, one that's really common that I see all the time is the moment somebody sees a snake, regardless of the identification of the snake, regardless of if it's venomous or not venomous, the first course of action is to go find the machete, kill the snake. And is that sort of relationship with the beings around us really truly necessary? So this is for you to contemplate. You know, what happens when you see a spider, a mosquito? What about your thoughts toward others or toward those beings? So that's the first of the yamas, ahimsa. The second of the yamas is satya, and this is truthfulness. I really love how one of my teachers presented this to me once, which is that this is really a demand of society. When we see people taking office, for example, or going into court, we really demand a code of honor from them, and they actually have to swear, you know, literally put their hand on usually the book that they hold most sacred to them in order to indicate that they are dedicated to being in a place of satya, in truthfulness. So this is also non-bias, not bending the truth, or at the very least recognizing your own bias. It really helps to keep the mind uncluttered. When we are not in a place of satya, it can be very challenging to keep all the different ideas straight, right? So think of the confusion and the clutter, the kind of the maya, the illusion or the ignorance and the cloudiness that we get into, the messiness when we aren't really fully aligned in our own truth and in truth with those around us. So this is satya. On the mat, again, this is going to look like being really honest about what's best for you on any given day, whether that's choosing the most appropriate style for you to practice or taking the modifications that you need. Or maybe it's about being really honest with your teacher, with your guide, about the way that something impacted you in the class. Off of the mat, this is about being real with yourself, noticing your own biases, not exaggerating, not telling even white lies. You know, we have this saying, like, if you can't say anything nice, don't say anything at all. However, you know, acknowledging our old rules such as this, truly encouraging a place of satya. So really being truthful to yourself and really, really being truthful and owning up to where you're at with those around you. Asteya is the third of the yamas. Asteya is non-stealing. So again, I think for a lot of people, what immediately comes to mind is, yes, I'm not going to walk into a yoga studio and quite literally steal, you know, the Ganesha statue that I really like that's on their altar. Again, this is not normally the level that most yoga practitioners are at. As a generalization. So what we're speaking of here expands way out and beyond stealing of physical items, material goods, or structures, but although of course it includes that as well. So non-stealing of material, not stealing, not taking that which is not freely given, not demanding more from another than that person is able to give. And two of the forms that I see this take often through my years on this planet and also in my own life is about respecting boundaries and also non-stealing of time. So meaning if someone says to you, no, or that's enough, or I can't give anymore, really honoring and respecting that without any sort of ill will. This is a practice of asteya, not taking more than that which is freely given. So on the mat, this will look like showing up on time, not stealing the time of the students or the teachers by arriving late, by disrupting the flow of the class that has already begun, respecting class etiquette. If you are to take your shoes off before you come in, then practicing that, because otherwise it's really stealing attention, it's stealing time, and it's also stealing awareness of the students around you, the other students around you. And off the mat, the examples I gave are really, I think, the best ones. Respecting boundaries of those around you and really being aware where you may ask for more than what is freely given. And also notice in your own life where someone may be asking more of you than what you're freely giving. And then this is where our practice of satya comes in, being really honest and speaking up about that. So these are ways we experience asteya. The fourth of the yamas is brahmacharya. So this is one that a lot of the Western practitioners really struggle with. The most commonly used translation of this is celibacy. So of course, modern practitioners, as we're pretty much all predominantly householders, for them, this is a huge red flag, like, oh my gosh, to be a yogi, I have to be celibate. And that is really not in most folks' interpretation of this term. This is truly not what this means in the case of a householder. Of course, for in ancient times, those that were on the renunciate path, it would perhaps quite technically mean living a life of celibacy, really like saving your entire body and soul and heart only for dedication to the divine. However, on the householder's path, what I really love is the way that the word breaks down. The etymology of the word is that Brahma means God or divine, and Charya means chariot. So we can think of brahmacharya as practices of getting in that chariot and bringing yourself closer to God or the divine of your understanding. So that which leads you back to source. And so this might mean transforming your sexual energy, being very mindful of the way that you use it, not abusing it, not manipulating with it, responsible usage of all of your energy that's in alignment with the other yamas and niyamas, being truthful about the amount of energy you have to give, in order that you might transform it into ojas, which is this life force that we have, these drops of life force that we have within us, so that we might use our energy and direct it toward having a stronger and a more balanced and a more lustrous life force, rather than kind of expending energy unnecessarily all around us and giving too much away to too many other people. So on the mat, this might look like being very clear about your sankalpa, so that you can come into that sacred space, right? That pathway back to source, so that you're not scattered and giving too much energy away throughout your practice, or overexerting or over-efforting when not necessary. Also, of course, quite simply not sexualizing the practice, being mindful about the ways that you might show up and or show off. And off the mat, this is going to look like a deep respect and reverence for, of course, for your sexual encounters, for your sexual partners, not using sexual encounters as a weapon or a means to manipulate. So brahmacharya, can be a really tough one for modern practitioners, but know that it is not reduced for the path of the householder. It is not reduced to only sexual celibacy. So the last of the 5 yamas is aparigraha. And aparigraha is non-attachment. This is a term or a word that folks in spiritual communities and the yoga community really love to throw around. And it's a lot easier said than done. So non-attachment to materials, to experiences, to relationships. And I really love this way of looking at it, not allowing your possessions possessions, whatever you feel that those may be, to possess you. Not allowing your possessions to possess you. Not being misled by that which you are attached to as your identity. Because this can be very harmful when we're very attached to a particular title or role or relationship. Then when something happens and changes that, it can be very devastating. This is really what can lead people into dark nights of the soul. Think about the big, major, life-changing events in one's life, death and divorce and a bad diagnosis. Perhaps you really, really identify as like the health nut. And then that attachment, it's incongruent if you get a poor health diagnosis, or you really, really identify as the wife or the husband, the good wife, the good husband, and then a divorce comes and that part of your identity that you're very attached to is gone. So considering attachments not just to material possessions, so that's certainly one that we see, but also in relationship. So on the mat, this is going to look like, all those yoga brand addictions that we love. Just check yourself. Where are you, going after something you truly need that will be helpful and supportive of your practice? Of course, we need to show up to yoga practices clothed, but do we need 84 pairs of leggings? Probably not. Also, this is a really interesting way that this shows up, is your attachment to particular parts of the physical practice. So if you were able to get into a pose on one day, but then you show up the next week and you're not able to get into that same pose, really check your emotional and energetic response to that. Do you see yourself somehow as a failure? Do you beat yourself up? Do you drop into a place of himsa, of violence towards yourself when you can't get into that same pose the next time around? And off the mat, this might look like a tendency to hoard, or having really a lot of possessiveness about your belongings. Stinginess or greediness would be not in alignment with a parigraha. And also this can apply to relationships. We can get very possessive about people, romantic partners, friends, family members. So notice what responses and reactions come up for you when you need to share, when you are put in a situation of sharing a person, an experience, or some of your possessions. So these are the 5 yamas, and again, I have the slides put up through the video, and you also have these available in your booklet, in your manual, and remember, these are really about the way that we're interacting with the world around us. So we're going to move now to the Niyamas, the 5 Niyamas, and these are more about the personal observances and the way we're relating in our inner world. So the Niyamas, again, 5 are discussed in the sutras. So total ethical guidelines or principles, we have 10. And these are the character building observances, the internal disciplines, as I mentioned, the codes to live soulfully, really about relating to inner world, and their personal practices for both for taking care of yourself and also being disciplined in this practice that is the human life. And so the first of the niyamas, most often called saucha, the pronunciation actually is shaucha. You probably won't hear that very often, but you'll see in the slide there's a little diacritical mark above that S, so shaucha, which is cleanliness. Cleanliness really, yes, of your body, of your space, but also of your heart, your breath, your mind, order, purity, what we see, what we eat, our relationships, our practices. So the mind and the spiritual practice loves an uncluttered space and an uncluttered field. This is why we do meditation after we do our physical practice, because we kind of work through that the cluttering and the spaces that need to be cleaned physically and mentally in order to have a more pure space for that more pure practice. And this is also why when you show up into yoga spaces, generally the studio is clean. They usually have a lot of respect, cleanliness, and order with the altar. There's cleanliness protocols for your feet, your shoes, your equipment, where you put away your belongings. It's not just kind of a free-for-all when you go into the space. So how this might show up, as I just mentioned, some examples on the mat, is really taking time to set sacred space, checking in on things like, do I have clean feet? And like, do I smell clean? Is my lack of cleanliness going to be disruptive or distracting to students around me? Dropping into a meditation practice to ensure that you are tending a clean mind. Off the mat, this is going to look like maintaining a clean and organized home. Being clean in what you're taking in, making sure you're looking for pure and positive readings and whatever you're viewing, watching, listening to, that it's orderly, that it's positive, that it's uncluttered, that it's clean, that it's pure. So the second of the niyamas is santosha. This is a tough one for lots of folks to really comprehend. The most fundamental translation is contentment. And no, this does not mean that you need to be happy all the time, or that you always need to, this good vibes only thing that has kind of crept in a little bit to the yoga field is really not true to the human experience. And we know this. Anyone in a human form knows that good vibes only and happy all the time is not true to the human experience. So contentment, what it really speaks of here, what santosha really speaks of here, is not fighting against your present reality. It doesn't mean giving up or not feeling what you're truly feeling. What it insinuates is being okay with your present state of reality. And so if you feel deep grief, acknowledging that, recognizing it, perhaps naming it, also in the practice of a parigraha, not being attached to it, but saying, I feel sad at the moment, and also that's okay. That's part of my humanness. And actually, isn't that so beautiful? This wide range of experiences that I'm able to have in this human form. So I feel sad, and that's okay. This too shall pass. The only constant we know is change. So being okay with whatever may arise, even if we may have labeled it as good or bad. So on the mat, being okay with what is available to you that day. We show up to the mat as a new and different person every time we arrive. So maybe one day we're really tight, we can't touch our toes, we have to bend deeply into our knees in that forward fold. And maybe on another day we can take our peace fingers and bind right around our big toe. And both of those are absolutely okay and perfect and divine. And then off the mat, as I mentioned, really just feeling what you need to feel and being honest about it. And also not being attached to it. Because like the movement of the clouds in the sky, like the weather patterns, what we feel is also constantly changing. And so someone can be in a very deep space of grief and have a moment where they feel joy, where they laugh. And I've experienced this, and I've seen it as well in loved ones, where it's like then we feel guilt, and we guilt ourselves for that fleeting moment of joy within the longer span of grief. And the reality is that everything that you feel is just perfect, because it's true. That's the satya, that's the truthfulness of your experience. So the third of the niyamas is tapas, which is an uplifting discipline or austerity. And again, this one can get misinterpreted a little bit. It doesn't always have to mean deeper effort or trying harder. Sometimes the yoga student's discipline is to do less or to cut back a little bit. So austerity, heat, it comes from the Sanskrit verb tap, which literally means to burn. So burning off, creating friction, which means, rubbing up against your samskaras. You're going to rub up against your own patterns, your own habits in order to build fire. And fire is the element of transformation. So we can't turn wood into ash, water into steam, metal into liquid without this transformative fire of power. And so within ourselves as well, we need to create friction if we want to change a pattern or a habit that's not serving us the best. So this is about developing new pathways, about practicing and living skillfully, about noticing your own patterns and really efforting to shift those that don't serve based on your present needs. So on the mat, this is what's really interesting with tapas. On the mat, some days that will look like doing that extra chaturanga, going for it, saying, you know what, actually, yes, I can. Yes, I do have the strength to do this. Yes, I do have the energy to do this. And other days, it's going to look like taking the child's pose and being honest with yourself and saying, you know what I actually need right now really is child's pose. I actually do really need an extra breath. And that is difficult for me to acknowledge and difficult for me to do. So I'm going to do it. So the fourth of the Niyamas is svadhyaya, which is self-study. Oh, excuse me, I didn't talk about what tapas might look like off of the mat. So I'm going to back up just a little bit. Off the mat, this is going to look like having the discipline to follow through with the positive routines, develop the new skills, take care of your health, even when you might not feel like it. I feel like for lots of practitioners of yoga, the deepest practice of tapas is actually showing up to the yoga class, whether you're practicing at home or at a studio away from your home, actually making the effort to get up and get there, particularly on the days when you don't want to. That is often the most intense practice of tapas that goes far beyond what you're actually experiencing on the mat. So a discipline to follow through with that which you know serves you, that which builds the friction and the fire to help you transform in positive ways. So the fourth of the Niyamas is svadhyaya, self-study, the study of wise words, work to uplift yourself, your own consciousness. This is observing, taking the seat of witness, observing without judgment, and studying and noticing. And so on the mat, this is going to look like paying close enough attention to yourself to really recognize what type of practice you need that day, studying yourself very closely. What does my nervous system need? What does my energetic and emotional state need and asking for? Or if you need to practice at all, maybe what best serves me is to take a day off as well. So really being able to tune in to your true needs is a deep practice of svadhyaya. And then off the mat, that might look like noticing your patterns and working actively to commit to those that serve you and also to change those that do not. So svadhyaya can work very closely in deep relationship with tapas. If we don't have the ability to self-study and notice where we're at and what we need, then tapas, that discipline, that austerity, doesn't really have much of a purpose because we don't know what we're disciplining or why we're creating the friction or what we're trying to change or shift. We actually have to have the self-study and the awareness first before we can dedicate to those practices. So the last of the 5 niyamas is Ishvara Pranidhana. Ishvara Pranidhana, which is a trusting of life, sometimes translated as surrender to God, the Ishvara, and surrendering to that which the universe is offering. it does not mean like forfeiting or giving up or, kind of giving in and saying like, well, I might as well not make any effort because I'm just surrendering everything, to the divine of my understanding. But this is more speaking about trust. And this is a pretty easy practice to undertake when everything seems like it's lining up and everything's going well. It's really easy to say, I trust, I'm going to give up my life into your hands. You're creating this beautiful path for me. I've got everything I need and everything's going great. And I have a loving partner and loving children and I love my home and I love my job and I love, all my friends. And when everything's easy, it's very easy to be in this place of trust. So it's very easy to be in that place of deep trust when things are smooth, right? Unwrinkled in your life. When we start to hit those speed bumps and challenges, it's much more difficult to be able to put our hands up and say, I trust, right? Thy will be done. So the last thing a grieving child or parent or sibling wants to hear is everything happens for a reason, right? Those are really unbelievably challenging words to absorb when you're in the throes of grief, when you're in the dark night of the soul. Life doesn't always make sense. And at the same time, there's this greater overreaching arc of everything that normally in hindsight, we can say, I understand why that went down that way. Even though it was tough, even though it was horrible, even though it was ugly, I see why that needed to happen. And so on the mat, this might look like Ishvara Pranidhana, might look like allowing your practice to become a prayer, really acknowledging that there's something greater at play, taking this practice of yoga really in its intended form as a sacred practice, as a way of a moving prayer, as a moving surrender to whatever form of divinity of that which is sacred that you connect with. And off the mat, this might look like trusting that you may not always get what you want, and we also can never understand the divine order of things. So we are responsible to trust that whatever we're receiving is exactly what we need, even when we know we do not and could not and cannot ever understand the divine order of things in this life. So these are the 5 yamas and the 5 niyamas, the ethical guidelines and principles for relating to the world around us, for relating to our inner world. And these, remember, are the first 2 limbs of the 8-limbed path of yoga. So really the ethical principles cannot be separated from the practice of asana. And I really recommend that if this is something that is of interest to you, please don't be overwhelmed by it, especially I know with the new terms, with the Sanskrit terms, it can feel a little bit scary. That's why I've included those here for you. But if you choose just 1 or 2, you may have, listening to these and moving through these, you may have thought to yourself, wow, I'm really actually already in alignment with this one, that one, the other one. And you may have heard a couple come up that you go, that one's pretty tough for me. So if you want to challenge yourself, I would say choose the one that's challenging you most and really start to notice your relationship with that one in life. If you'd like to maybe create a little bit less friction, take the 1 or 2 that you already feel like you've got those down pretty well and start observing and noticing how you relate with those in life. And I want to share a quote here for you from Swami Kripalu, from my lineage of Kripalu. He said, by firmly grasping the flower of a single virtue, a person can lift the entire garland of yama and niyama. And I really love this imagery of lifting the whole garland because they are so interconnected. Once you start becoming very, very dedicated to any one of these, you'll see how they do not operate and function in a vacuum. They are all so deeply related. And this is why we see people see things happening, like someone being dedicated to yoga for years and years, and then, they decide to become vegetarian or vegan. It feels very natural for them. It's a way for them to practice shaucha. It's a way for them to incorporate ahimsa. What they're feeling very naturally, even if they don't have the words for it, is the interconnectedness of this whole garland of yama and niyama. So please take some time to write about the yama and or niyama that is most challenging for you right now, as well as take some time to write about the yama and or niyama that you feel like you've really got down, you've practiced, you've nailed it, and enjoy this study both on and off the mat. Thank you so much for your attention, your awareness, and this deep study with me today. Enjoy the rest of your day, and I'll see you soon. Namaste.